Thank you for joining us, Jesse. For everyone on the call, I'm Guillermo Ortiz. I'm the Sustainability and Diversity Educational Programs Manager in the Office of Sustainability at UC Merced. And I want to pass it over to Erin to introduce herself briefly before we can pass it on to Jesse and continue the conversation.
Thank you. I'm Erin, the Sustainable Food Programs Coordinator, and I coordinate all those programs already discussed previously. And I work at UC Merced, and I get to work with like Jesse and Guillermo and Belinda and all these other awesome people. So I'm very excited today to have this AMA with Jesse, and we can just begin. Does anyone have any questions to start?
Yeah. Or, one thing I would like to do, Jesse, if you could give a little bit about yourself, a brief little bio so that folks can get to know you a little better.
Yeah, sure. 1 second. Let me close the door real quick.
I got to close my door too, actually.
All right. Well, so for those who don't know me, my name is Jesse Chakrin. I work for Yosemite National Park, and I have been collaborating with UC Merced since 2007, spring 2007. So it has been quite a journey with the school, and it has been the joy of my career, my professional career. It was a significant shift from what I was doing. I had spent 5 summers working in Alaska as a wilderness ranger, and I had spent about 3 working in Yosemite as a wilderness ranger as well. And during my time in Yosemite, it was kind of a slow awakening for me, but this realization that parks and public lands are intended for everybody. They supposedly represent the democratic ideal of protecting some of the best places in the world for everybody to benefit from, either personally in their own mental and emotional, physical health, or societally in the ways that public lands can serve people with resources, with access, with opportunity. And so over 8 years of working in particularly wild spaces, I was noticing for actually quite a few years that the people that got to benefit from parks and wild spaces were not necessarily reflective of the population of the country. And that by and large, it was a privileged space. And so it was a moment for me where I was like, well, if this is what we purport to be, I would like to be a part of helping the parks to kind of fulfill this democratic ideal and become more accessible to people maybe that have barriers to access, that have whatever reasons that they're not able to benefit as much as I have from my experiences in national parks and in wilderness. And I wrote a grant proposal in 2006 to try and create a continuation program for high school students. And it was for a program called WildLink. And these are underserved, in wilderness spaces, high school students that come and spend a week in Yosemite backpacking primarily. And after that, there wasn't a whole lot for them. And I thought this was kind of a disservice to them, in that they had just probably had an experience that was pretty eye-opening and potentially life-changing. And then there was nowhere to go from there. And so I wrote a proposal that allowed some highly motivated WildLink alumni to come back to Yosemite for a 2-week job shadowing opportunity where they could see what kind of careers are available in a national park. And in doing so, I had to get clearance from what would be similar to like a vice chancellor in Yosemite. And so as a seasonal ranger, I screwed up all my courage and put on my best, cleanest uniform, and I went to his office and I asked for permission to put this forward. And I just so happened that person was Steve Shackleton, and who is currently working at UC Merced in a variety of capacities. But he was at the time trying to get a physical representation of the partnership agreements that we had had with UC since the site was selected, I believe in 97 or 98. And we've had an MOU, I think, since 1999. and our superintendent was at the groundbreaking in 2002. And so this was kind of the realization, the physical realization of this idea that he had been carrying forward on the park side that was met equally on the UC side by Carol Tomlinson Kesey primarily at that time. And the values of the project that I was putting forward aligned kind of perfectly with his. And he said, "Well, if we get funding, you should apply for this job." I was like, ooh, I don't know. This is a pretty big shift from what I've been doing. I was kind of aimed at being a wilderness ranger who was also involved in search and rescue. I had just signed up for a wilderness EMT course. I had gotten all of my rope rescue certifications, and I was ready to kind of travel in that career direction. And I was still, you know, loving my winters where I got to climb and ski and travel. But we ended up getting the grant, and I applied for the job, and then made the final cut, and then was offered the position. And then I said, "You mind if I take a week to decide?" And they were pretty shocked that I was not jumping at it. But it was a one-year position that had no certainty of continuing, a one-year grant-funded position that could have just been the end of it right there. You know, for quite a few years in the early years of UC Merced, there was still a lot of questioning as to whether or not the campus would thrive in the way that it has. And those were interesting times. We rode the roller coaster up and down. Especially 2008 was a really wild experience as the economy, especially of Merced, and all of the construction that was kind of going, you know, 200 miles an hour to meet the anticipated demand of this growing university cratered. It seemed pretty stressful at the time. Anyhow, so, you know, 13 years later, I am still in this position. It has been, you know, I was realizing that my Park Service career, if it did not include this partnership, this collaborative opportunity, and all of these things that I've kind of launched into that I didn't really know how to do, I probably would have left the Park Service years ago, because I was becoming more and more qualified for the job that I had. And that is not necessarily the best career choice, is to narrow your opportunities further and further to a tiny little point where you're just stuck. But being able to work with the university, it's been so awesome. It's such a creative space. The growth of the school, the student population, all of it has been inspiring to me over and over and over again. You know, there's quite a few years where I was like, man, this is hard, and I don't know. And I've been through, I think this is my 4th chancellor and my 5th superintendent in the time that I've been in this collaboration. So there's been a lot of political upheaval, both nationally, regionally, locally. There's a lot of organizational, like, culture and politics that I had to learn about. And I continue to stick with it. And the reason is because of the students. It is the coolest student community and population that I've ever had access to, either as a student or as a professional. I love that the students, by and large, are first-generation college students, meaning that they're already leaders in their communities and their families. And the work I get to do is to help them continue to develop their leadership skills, both in the social and environmental realms, and to clarify and crystallize those experiences with access to Yosemite. My hope is that we can figure out ways to do this maybe asynchronously, together but separate, with some type of opportunities to reflect that are cohesive across the group, but obviously not doing it in large groups. I think experiences in wild spaces are valuable on a human scale. I think that the pandemic has clarified people's need for time in nature as much as anything I have seen in my lifetime. I think it is essential for mental and emotional health to be able to access green spaces. And thus, I think it is an environmental justice issue that is interwoven with a social justice issue. And so I think it continues to be important to work to break down barriers for communities that maybe don't feel as welcome as others. So I don't see my passion for this work waning at all right now. I think it's really different. The virtual world has created challenges, but also opportunities to reach further than we have been. You know, the virtual space does not limit one to any particular geography. So I think our challenge is to find ways that we can translate a park experience through virtual means that is meaningful. And that is a challenge. But if we can figure out how to prepare people to go in person or pique their curiosity and help them to have even maybe more knowledge as they enter into that first experience, I think we will have succeeded in the context that we're in right now. And I will stop talking now because I'd love to answer questions if people have questions for me. I will preface this. There were a few questions that Erin shared with me. I am not a wildlife biologist.
Oh, that was probably mine.
I don't play one on TV, but I did a little research on a few of the questions that I saw. So I will do my best to answer them, but I'm not a wildlife biologist. I am a naturalist, which means I am kind of like a mile wide and an inch deep. So don't ask too deep questions. All right, with that, I'm open to questions from anyone. And you can put them in the chat if you don't feel like talking to. I'll keep that up as well.
Well, my first question, do you live in the park?
I do not live in the park. Permanent employees, unless there's something called required occupants, or they have to like go through this really arcane bid process to get access to permanent housing in Yosemite. So since I have been collaborating with UC, I didn't actually want to live in the park because it would have made my commute to campus about 2 hours. So
Okay.
I found a location in Mid Pines, which is just before you drop down to the Merced River as you're heading, if you're heading east on Highway 140 towards Yosemite from Merced, before you drop down to the river, there's this tiny little town with like one Caltrans station and a post office. It's called Mid Pines. We call it the Pride of the Sierra. I think it's aspirational more than real, but that is where I live. It's about 1 hour to each valley.
Oh,
1
wow.
hour to the Great Central Valley and about 1 hour to Yosemite Valley. And so for me, that was the perfect place. It allowed me to actually own my home and my property. Some of the housing adjacent to the park is a weird situation where you actually don't own the land, you just own the structure, which is not a situation I wanted to be in. And so that's where I ended up. It is, it's pretty rural. It's pretty quiet, but it was ideal for me at the time and continues to be a good place to live.
Yeah, Jesse, want to talk a little bit more about what you were talking about before about really, issues of equity and inclusion with access to the parks. Just a shout out to Dania Matos, who joined the call, who is the Chief Diversity Officer at UC Merced. Could you talk a little bit about kind of, your efforts to increase access, and if any ways, if you're looking for any opportunities to kind of explore that opportunity to collaborate further, I'm sure her office would be happy to discuss with you. So
yeah, I'll start by saying that I'm always open to collaboration. I'm open to new ideas. I don't think we have settled on anything that we would say is like dogmatic. So always open to ideas, collaboration, even just brainstorming of ways to create better avenues for access, lowering barriers, whatever it is. I don't pretend like I have all the answers at all. And I think that there are too many students as well as community members in Merced and the Central Valley that need access to have any one person try and like meet that need. So I will start with that. I think, I started right in the kind of transition phase into the Obama administration. And the Obama administration was very much interested in how we could do better as far as providing an equitable experience to access to national parks. Fortunately for me, we had been already doing the work. So we were really set up in a way that was perfect for that change in kind of administration, or at least in the the way that they were thinking about what it meant to be a democratic institution. So what that looks like in a couple of the reasons for this being a focus of the national park system, we were thinking about how we were going to transition to the second century of the National Park Service. What does it mean to remain relevant in a country where the population demographics are changing rapidly, and that the idea of what a park is going to evolve as people evolve, as people change, as people as the demographics and makeup of communities changes. What are the needs that people express as far as their public lands, because these are for the people. And so that was something where looking at especially staffing numbers as well as visitation numbers, but especially staffing numbers, the Park Service was pretty clear that we were not representative of the country, or at least, if you think about parks regionally, not representative of the regions that surround the parks. And that's especially true in California, where if you look at national statistics, around 80% of park employees are Caucasian and like 60% are men. And so that just isn't reflective of the country at all, especially not California, where, or Merced, an area where more than 50% of people are Latino, Hispanic in background. So this is pretty glaring, it's a pretty glaring experience. And I think the other thing is that a lot of the infrastructure that was developed, especially was Mission 66. And it was developed with the idea of like a Caucasian Anglo nuclear family, 4 to 6 people, 1 car. And so I think a lot of our built environment is also not necessarily welcoming of different family structures, especially multi-generational families. And so I think there are a lot of kind of systemic ways that the parks don't necessarily serve or evolve as quickly as the populations around them do. And I think that is partly the kind of cultural fault of our Organic Act, which is that we are in the forever business, the perpetuity business. And it's kind of like turning a battleship, it's pretty slow to turn. I hope that as our staffing, the makeup of our employee population shifts, will be potentially a little bit more nimble. But I think it is a balance, because we don't want to sway with every breeze, in that as we have seen over the last 12 years, things can shift really dramatically from one administration to the next. And we are trying to protect these places forever. And so they should stand beyond politics. And so I think that it's important that we do have a way to move smoothly, but maybe not exceedingly fast, but smoothly, and cognizant of the ways that things are changing around us. So that's has been my biggest motivation is just that I didn't see everyone represented when I looked at who was going backpacking, who is accessing parks by and large, and who worked in parks. I thought these were opportunities that have universal human benefits that everyone should have access to. And that was my motivation. And then as I learned more, it's impossible to unwind environmental justice issues from social justice issues, especially as we're looking at impacts to human health for communities from COVID-19, as you think about access to green space, clean air, clean water, and how that's playing out with something like a virus. It's just everything's wound around itself. And so when you try to address one issue, you have to address them all. And so this is the angle that I have access to, and this is the angle that I guess is the one that I want to keep pushing on. It's because it's where the lever that I can pull on has a little bit of movement, a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look forward not only within our office of being a thought partner with you, but I'm sure Danya would feel the same way. So thank you for the really in-depth answer on that.
Yeah. other questions from folks? It can be really general too, just about being a park ranger.
So, I guess I need to catch up on what we're actually what we're doing here. So I'm trying to understand. You take groups of people into the park for backpacking.
So my job now is less of a traditional park ranger and more of like a program administrator and a liaison to the UC. In previous life, I was a wilderness ranger, and I would issue backpacking permits, educate visitors, and go on patrol, and then respond to search and rescue calls as I was able to. That component of my career kind of shifted in 2006-07, and I kind of shifted into this more like partnership and collaboration, as well as teaching and educating. And the main pieces of the work that we do at UC Merced is we have a 2-year leadership development program that focuses on creating positive social and environmental change, and empowering students to do so, to at least have one framework by which they can notice challenges in their world and address them. And then a couple of other things that I collaborate on. One is a summer-long internship that happens in Yosemite. 14 students from UC Merced every year, except for this year, have been able to go up and live and work in the park. And that is both for personal as well as professional development. And it is also to help the park to evolve, to bring in a youth voice and a youth perspective, as well as people from different ethnicities, backgrounds, geographic locations, to kind of expand what it is that we do and help us think critically about how we do it. And then the last thing is a student-run wilderness education center that's based on campus. And so this is students that are helping share Yosemite with their fellow students, faculty, and staff in the surrounding community. They are the ones who actually lead the trips now. I have kind of transitioned out of that particular element, but will do so if I get the opportunity to. It's hard to be out of the office for that amount of time. But in a normal year, we do a series of trips in collaboration with the Recreation Athletic Department, usually around 6 to 8 a semester. There's a summer orientation called the Week of Wilderness for incoming freshmen. And then we do a whole bunch of programming that is primarily educational in nature, educational and environmental kind of education, with 4th grade students from the Merced City Office of Education. And that's every 4th grade student in the district, which is around 1,300 a year, we will take up to Yosemite and have a field trip with them. And that is primarily run by students from UC Merced. The Wilderness Education Center, I saw a question come across the chat, is located in the Student Activity and Athletic and Activity Center, which is behind the main gym. It's on the 1st floor. It's on the Rancher's Way side of the building. And that would normally be staffed 5 days a week from 8 to 5 with students in uniform who have spent at least one summer working in Yosemite and are a resource for their fellow students, faculty, and staff. But in COVID, we are not operating in the physical space. We are working remotely. We're trying to figure out how to do like a remote office hours, and I'm not totally sure what that will look like, but we're going to experiment and roll something out. Yeah. Other questions for me? It can be about living and working in the park. It can be about Alaska. It can be about wildlife. And Lynn, I know you had a question about wildlife.
I don't want to be a pig here, but this is happening. How does art figure into what you do? Is there any art component of bringing everybody to Yosemite? Because it's such a place to do that.
Yeah, so we have been collaborating with the GASP program, the Global Arts Studies program, for 6 years now. And one of the things that we do is we bring students up to the Yosemite Facelift, which is an annual cleanup that happens in September, the end of September. And with the found objects from that, they'll create a sculpture that's based on a theme. And then that sculpture stays up with an opportunity for visitors to respond to it in a notebook for about a week. And then we take it down because it's found objects, and it ends up getting recycled primarily.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. And then we've done other projects. There are a couple of collaborators in GASP that I've worked with over the years. And it is an area that I'm always looking for more opportunity, because I agree. I think it is truly inspirational in a creative sense. And the other way that we function with the arts is not necessarily through visual arts, but through writing. A huge component of our program is a reflective components that are journal-based, primarily for the student, but opportunities to be quiet and be reflective. As an undergraduate, it's not something I learned until I was well out of college, but it is something that is incredibly useful as you're thinking about your own personal growth and development. And having a quiet, kind of inspiring space to do that in is really, really useful. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and Belinda mentioned, we have also been collaborating with Katie Brokaw on Shakespeare in Yosemite for years. Since its inception, we've been a part of helping to promote that, helping to execute it. And then in this past year, we actually made it an official capstone project of our leadership program. And unfortunately, COVID shut down the in-person component of that. But they were developing educational materials for integrating that into local high school curriculum, specific class this time, but I think with an eye on the future of being more expansive.
Yeah, Jesse, got another question coming from my climate change science and policy background. I'm interested, right, given current events, right, with the fires that are occurring in many of the national parks or parks around California. And I love the focus of youth leadership development in your programs. How has climate change and climate change education informed that process as we are dealing with this kind of changing environment that is in many ways threatening these parks across the state?
Well, I think for years we've been trying to incorporate this idea. Well, I'll start with this, is that the generation of students from millennials, starting 10 years ago to Gen Z now, have been told over and over again by adults my age and older that they are going to have to fix this. And it's a pretty disheartening message when you look at the state of the world. And so one of the things that's been a focus for me for years is not only that we're, asking people to be a part of the solution, but also empowering them and giving them tools by which they can actually take on at least one framework within which they can start to take action on some of the challenges that they see in the community and the world around them. I think, though more prescient right now, climate change is, the pandemic is a little more prescient right now, but I think it's a perfect analog for climate change. It is a situation whereby individual action may not have an incredibly visible impact, but it requires all of us to be committed. And then the impact of it is something that will be felt by everybody. And it may not be immediate in one community or another, but this is not going to leave anyone untouched. And so I think in some ways, this global pandemic is the human timescale kind of perfect analog for climate change on a geologic timescale. So how has it informed our curriculum? We are constantly trying to figure out ways by which students can take action on issues that are meaningful to them, and climate change has probably risen to the top of that pile over the last 7 years. I think it is going to be more balanced this year, especially with the social activism and uprising of awareness in certain communities. I think it's going to be a little more balanced this year, but it has been the issue that students have wanted to focus on as much as anything. And I think that is, by and large, in large part due to the fact that, this is a world that is visibly, we're seeing the worst case scenarios playing out. And we're seeing that in real time, in human time now, from these massive wildfires that are releasing huge amounts of carbon. They're happening all over the world, from the Arctic to the rainforest to whole countries, where Australia burned last year. And the impacts of these things are now being felt, not theoretically in the future, but we are watching it happen. And so I think empowering young people to take action, or at least not empowering them, but helping them to have a skill set whereby which they can take action on the things that they feel so powerfully and deeply, is the responsibility of people who are my age and older. I think it's time for us to stop being like, well, you're going to get to deal with this, and kind of like extracting a little more value from this dying corpse of a system that never maybe really worked for everyone anyway, and then moving on. It's time to actually pass the torch, but with intention, and with skills involved. And so that is certainly my goal for the end of our leadership program, is that students feel like they have a way that they can take the theoretical knowledge that they've gained from their time in university and put it to use with the really, really important challenges that they're facing in and around their own homes, on a societal scale, either if that's national or international, or if it's community-based. I think, however students want to engage, I just want them to feel like they have a way to do so that feels useful and meaningful to them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions from any of the students that are here? I don't know if everyone, Zachary or Sharon May or Oscar, I can't see.
So my question was, it had to do with geological surveying of Yosemite National Park and like how in depth they go with it. I myself am studying to be a mechanical engineer, and throughout high school I was infatuated with drones, and I did a lot of drone work with my community and stuff, and with my school. And I plan to pursue something like that if Yosemite has something like that, on the park, doing like LiDAR surveying and stuff like that. Just recently, I 3D printed cathedral rocks.
That's awesome.
3D scan cathedral.
So
yeah,
cool.
and I just want to pursue more stuff like this with my mechanical engineering degree and my infatuation with Yosemite.
Yeah, very cool. So I'll tell you a couple things that I know. I think so. We have relatively accurate mapping of at least Yosemite Valley. So Yosemite Valley was LiDAR scanned in collaboration with the military several years ago. The reason for this is because we have one of the few PhD level geologists that works in the National Park Service, and his name is Greg Stock. So if you're looking for some of the more interesting work that's happening with the geology of Yosemite, look for Greg Stock. He's multi-sited. I think his last paper was published in Nature. What he was doing with LiDAR in Yosemite Valley was he was trying to determine, could you take high resolution 1 centimeter or under scans of the valley rock walls and figure out where rockfall was happening. So post rockfall, you can look at a LiDAR scan before, and then you can look at an image after. And because of the accuracy of the scan, you can actually estimate the volume of the rockfall and exactly where it came from. So that was some cool work that he did. That's why if you go into Google Earth, the resolution for Google Earth in Yosemite Valley is awesome. It's super cool. You can zoom way in, and it's really neat because you can kind of fly around places that you can't access on your feet. It's kind of the areas that maybe only peregrine falcons and other birds and maybe a few rock climbers go. But it's really cool. I wish we had that level of accuracy in the mapping for the rest of the park. And I think there may be a future in which I think a couple of challenges. One, LiDAR units are getting a lot smaller, and I don't know if you've worked with Josh Veers on campus, but he's been shrinking down LiDAR to do some stream bank monitoring in Yosemite and trying to make it drone mountable. I think a lot of that is for mapping of agricultural use mapping. So he's flying drones over fields and orchards and trying to get better data on what those look like structurally. But I can see really cool applications for those things, especially if you're trying to access hard to access areas. Cliff faces, for example, is something that Yosemite has tons of, and it's hard to get good scans of. So I think there's a future in this. The other thing that we'd probably have to improve is the data throughput of our cell system. You know, we have really bad cell service, and I know that he needed 4G to transfer the data that he was getting from the LiDAR unit to his computer, and that's pretty unreliable in Yosemite in general at this point. I don't know when we might have better coverage. I know that having places that don't have cell coverage is kind of a increasingly rare situation. And I think it's also one where maybe it'd be worthwhile to keep a few of those places in the world so that people can truly disconnect and have opportunities to do so. But I think there will be a lot more experimentation with this kind of technology in Yosemite Valley, especially if there is a 5G tower there at some point. That would open the door to a lot of things. And I can see it being useful for wildlife surveying. I can see it being useful. There's a whole lot of bat studies that are going on, and they're probably trying to figure out exactly where they live and why. So there's a lot of applications. The other thing that I think would be really neat for drones that I think a lot of the firefighters are doing is putting thermal scans into the air that are not necessarily manned, because flying helicopters is pretty dangerous. This would obviously have to be in coordination with the firefighters, because every time a private citizen puts a drone up in the air, it shuts down the air show, and that's really bad, especially in COVID-19, where we have fewer ground resources and lots of air resources trying to put out big fires. So I think it's a pretty interesting future, and I think drones absolutely have a future in land management. And I think that the parks are going to be pretty slow to adopt them, just because we're pretty slow on new technology in general. But I do see a lot of opportunity there for sure.
Thank you so much. That was super helpful. That answered everything and more. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, my pleasure. Any other questions for me? Oh, you're welcome, Belinda. It's nice to see you. I miss seeing you on campus. I miss seeing everybody on campus, to be honest. Lynn, I did bye, Belinda.
Bye.
I did a little research on smoke impacts to wildlife. It's very poorly understood. There's almost no published research on smoke impacts to wildlife. That said, I think that, you know, any mammalian creature that, you know, breathes air is probably getting pretty impacted by the amount of smoke that's in the air, especially from a big fire like the Creek Fire, where you know, near the fire it's like 600 parts per million. You know, this is more than double hazardous air quality. Even in places like Bishop that are 60 miles away, they were hitting almost 500 parts per million.
Wow.
It is, yeah, I think that the impacts are assumed. There isn't very much documented research. It's really hard to, there was some work on doing necropsies, but I don't think they had anything definitive. And then there was some work on like an animal rescue shelter, but that also wasn't definitive. So I think it's an area, you know, maybe for future research for people who are looking at getting their veterinary degree or their wildlife biologists, and they're trying to better understand the impact of smoke on wildlife. But I would say that anecdotally and by my own understanding of my own process, it's probably pretty damaging to their lungs. And large, especially in fast moving wildfires where the flames are moving, you know, like the Paradise Fire, that was moving at like 80 miles an hour downhill, downwind. And so wildlife can't escape that, you know, they can't. So, you know, on top of the smoke impacts, there's also just the direct flame impacts on wildlife. And I think on these really fast moving fires, there is a significant amount of mortality that happens in those areas as well. But yeah, surprisingly poorly understood.
So animals like turkey vultures that rely on smell, do they still, how does that work?
I would highly doubt that they could hunt effectively when the plume is throwing ash 50,000 feet into the air. You know, this creek fire is looking like the apocalypse, you know, and I just don't think that, I think they would leave. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know that they would be able to function in a normal way. You know, this is conjecture, but the plume coming off that fire is just so superheated. It's creating its own weather. You know, you can hear thunder and lightning that's coming out of that. And it's just incredibly energetic and violent and really dark.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So I can't imagine that it wouldn't have a very, very direct impact on especially animals that depend on their sense of smell for hunting,
Right.
Or vision, to be honest. You know, they're not going to be able to see.
Or like the bats. I mean, I don't see how they would be able to function either with all the smoke.
I don't know how echolocation would be impacted. You know, it depends on how big the particulate is that's in the air. You know, these big plumes, they'll actually take like branches and whole pine cones, and like huge chunks of tree get sucked up into these fires when they're putting off like 70-meter flames. The amount of energy is wild. To put ash 50,000 feet, you know, that's 20,000 feet higher than an airplane flies.
Wow.
It's the amount of energy is just, it's hard to conceive, especially when the fire's going like this one is. Yeah, and you look at it and you're like, oh, that looks like maybe a nuclear bomb. It looks so crazy, and it looks like a mushroom cloud. You can see it from LA, and you can see it from Vegas. You can see it from all over the place. I mean, 50,000 feet in the air. Yeah, it's pretty wild. Other questions from folks? Any other questions?
Jesse, you mentioned you started your career off in Alaska. Kind of what brought you into a career right centered around nature, and what brought you to Alaska first?
Sorry, my mom. I can't talk right now, Mom. Sorry. I need. Thanks.
No worries, Jesse. And by the way,
Life.
you know, if we're running out of time, by all means, I think.
Yeah.
No, that's okay.
Let us know.
So what took me to Alaska? It was actually my sister was working as a volunteer. She was volunteering up there, and I went to visit. And I went for a 2-week backpacking trip, and I had never seen anything like it. I'm born and raised in Michigan. That's where I am right now. And I started backpacking when I was pretty young, but Alaska is something different. It is a truly wild landscape, and it is incredibly unpopulated. You know, the biggest city is Anchorage. I think there's about 300,000 people in Anchorage now. There's around 1.2 million in the whole state of Alaska, which is about third the size of the entire lower 48. You know, the scale of Alaska is just hard to imagine until you see it. And I was blown away. It was a really humbling experience in the natural environment. It was a place where top predators are still healthy and in large populations, and where humans, when we're moving around in that park specifically, you know, it's a designated wilderness, so no mechanized travel, there's no trails, and no firearms are allowed. So you're kind of not the top of the food chain. For the first time, maybe at least for me, the first time in my life, I was like, wow, I am squarely in the web. And that is a really humbling experience, to not be the top and to feel a part of it. That was the thing that really turned me on, was like to look out, see a landscape that was relatively unchanged for probably hundreds of thousands of years, and to feel like I wasn't the thing that was dominating or controlling it, but that I needed to be really aware and be really kind of present in the natural world so as to not die. Yeah, humbled by it. The hardest trips of my life, the things that made me like think that maybe I'd have to quit backpacking, the things that tested my physical and mental kind of capacity to the edge, over and over again. Alaska was a place that did that. And I think being humbled in the face of the natural world is something that would probably benefit our society, in a real and tangible way, because I think it's an experience by which I stopped feeling totally separate from the natural world, where I could climate control things and get in my car and travel. It was like, wow, I'm really a part of this, and it's really clear to me and very tangible to me right now. And I've been able to carry that with me. You know, I haven't been to Alaska since 2009. I haven't worked in Alaska since 2003. And I still have these like incredibly powerful memories of experiences, especially with grizzly bears and wolves, where you're just like, oh my God, you're so big. And we are so weak and slow, amazingly slow. Yeah, so I think I wish that everyone could have, and this is part of the awakening of like wanting to create more access to these types of experiences, was that I wish that everyone could have, if you know, I was thinking is like, wow, if everyone could have an experience like this, if it wasn't just the realm of the privileged few, we would probably have a more engaged environmental movement, more engaged environmental kind of commitments on a national level and policy realm. And, you know, I think it would behoove us, you know, for nothing else but our own human self-interest of persisting. But yeah, it's a magical place. Glaciers into the sea with bald eagles everywhere, and whales, and sea otters, and then in the interior, moose and caribou, grizzly bears. I saw a couple of wolverines in my 5 years there, and wolves, and it's just truly wild space. And then the fall is awesome too. You know, northern lights turns any adult into a small child. Like it's like magic, you know. And I know it's, you know, you know, electromagnetic radiation pulsing through our upper atmosphere, but it looks like magic, I swear. Yeah, I encourage anyone, if you can figure it out, to go. Any other questions?
I don't
So
have.
when you take, what's a typical day there? When you take a group of these students to the park, what kinds of things are you doing?
I would say that one of the benefits of my job is that there is not a typical day. I thrive on, you know, having a lot of dynamism in my work life. But some things that we hope that students would experience, a sense of awe and wonder. I think there's a particularly interesting research out of UC Berkeley about the power of awe and collective action. A professor named Dr. Kettner, I believe. Yeah, to feel connected, but also maybe a part of something bigger than you, is a really powerful experience. And it's pretty undeniable. So I hope students experience awe and wonder. I hope they have questions. I hope their curiosity is piqued. I hope they see the natural world and wonder why. Yeah, you're welcome, Donnie. I really look forward to connecting more, maybe when things settle a little on the academic side of things, and we have some a little bit of room to breathe as students get settled. But I would love to connect with you outside of this environment and see if there's things that we can do maybe in a non-COVID year, or in a COVID year. Other things that I hope students experience, I hope they see something that kind of blows their mind. I hope they have a shared experience with others that they will take home with them. And I hope they leave with a sense of stewardship, a sense of like a connection to the natural world that maybe helps them to feel like they want to take care of it a little bit, or a lot. So, you know, how we do that, some of it's curriculum, some of it's adventure-based, some of it is cohort structured, some of it is about writing reflection, some of it's just about going for a hike and challenging yourself physically. But those are the main pieces, you know, that I hope students have. And that could be students anywhere from like 4 years old all the way to students that are in their 60s.
Cool.
Yeah.
But Jesse, I want to be respectful of your time as well.
Sure.
And I know you have family there too. But if anyone has follow-up questions, Jesse, would you mind throwing your email in chat just in case they want to follow up with you and maybe engage further?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I am the only Jay Chakrin at UC Merced. I have a variety of accounts, but this is a good one. This is a good one as any.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and if students are interested in spending more time, the Yosemite Leadership Program, the application period closes Tuesday at 11:59. Highly encourage anyone to apply. If there's anyone that you know that might be interested in this program, please share that application with them. It is the power of the cohort that makes the program special. So having a group of students that are passionate and excited about how their academic world and the natural world can align and help them to kind of create positive social and environmental change in their community. That's what we're looking for. We don't need any particular major. You have to be a student in good standing, but you don't have to be a 4.0 student. And you don't have to have any experience in a national park. That is just our platform in the area that we practice, where things can become real, but it is not a requirement to be like a Eagle Scout or, you know, grow up doing it. No, in fact, I think it's really important that we have a diversity of experiences, backgrounds, and ideas, and that's what makes it really rich. So if you can think of anyone on this, if you can think of a student that might be interested, please let them know that our application period is closing soon, and we would love to read their application. It's called the Yosemite Leadership Program, and you can find it through the student leadership, the Sousa Center. And I can, let me put this in the chat real quick. I think it's why. Actually, you can just email me. If you're interested, just email me and I will send you a link to the application. All right.
Perfect.
My apologies once again for being late. Yeah, sorry about the timing mix up.
No worries.
I thought I was like getting everything done. Oh, thanks, Zachary. I appreciate it. Thanks for putting that in the chat. And yeah, my apologies.
No worries. We still got the conversation going. I just appreciate you being able to take the time. I know you mentioned you were cooking dinner, so I think I hope you have the opportunity to enjoy it.
I've not eaten yet, but I thought I was getting ahead of the game and like going to be done eating before I did this. But yeah, whatever. It's all fine.
Well, I appreciate the flexibility, Jesse, and so
yeah,
thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure folks will follow up with you as we go on. But yeah, Erin, is there anything else that you wanted to say?
I just loved everything you said about climate change and being humbled by nature and really everything. You're fascinating, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and I love to share the work that I get to do that I am fortunate to get to do with the university. It has been like I said, it's just been the highlight of my career. Yes, Dania, you're welcome. Please join us. In fact, actually, if you would like to, we are expanding our opportunities for guest speakers this year because we want to make sure that our platform, we make use of the virtual platform. You know, sometimes it's hard for people to show up in person, but it has been easier to access. So if you're interested, Dania, maybe you'd be willing to join the first year students sometime in the fall or maybe in the spring as a guest speaker.
I would love that, Jesse. I actually was a Girl Scout. I think I made it to a Brownie. My mom's right next to me. Was I a Brownie, Mom? What was I? Okay, I made it to Brownie.
Awesome.
And so I am so in.
All right,
so
fantastic. Awesome, wonderful. Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you all for setting this up. It's my pleasure. I love talking about the work that I am fortunate to get to do with you all. And yeah, any ideas for collaboration? If anything, creativity was peaked. Yeah, I'm open. I'm open to ideas for sure.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll definitely have some ideas that I'm thinking about. But Jesse, I'll reach out to you to talk about that later. But thank you so much, and I really don't want to be the person to keep you from dinner, so I'll let you get back to it. And I hope you enjoy the meal with your mother.
All right. Thank you.
Take it easy.
All right.